Where's the money? I've been sending you every month, Jack and Sarah. Look emaciated. James, my husband, who had just returned from an overseas assignment, yelled at me as soon as he got home. What do you mean? I was shocked and stared at James, not understanding what he was talking about. I've been saving the money. Why are Jack and Sarah emaciated? Don't play, Dom. You borrowed money from Jack, right? He contacted me, saying, can't afford proper meals. The photos he sent showed both of them terribly thin. What are you talking about? I hadn't borrowed any money from Jack. They were fine just a few months ago. It's unlikely for them to become so thin so suddenly. James completely believed Jack's words and treated me as a bad person. I couldn't let myself or James be manipulated by Jack any longer. That's the only thing I couldn't tolerate. I had to expose Jack and Sarah's wrongdoing. I'm Amanda, 61 years old. I work part-time at a local bakery. I've been living alone for the last few years. James, my husband, was assigned overseas. He's now over 60 and works for a construction company, still working hard as a site supervisor. For the past few years, he's been guiding and assisting locals in developing countries in building large commercial facilities. Although I was worried about his first overseas assignment, he seems to enjoy it, getting along well with the cheerful locals. James sends me $2,000 every month for living expenses, so I've been living comfortably on my own. We have a son, Jack, who also works for a construction company like James. He married Sarah 3 years ago and lives in an apartment nearby. Neighbors say it's nice to have a son close by, but that's not really the case. Since getting married, he hardly ever visits. Jack left home during his rebellious years, and we haven't been in much contact since. I hoped things would change once he got married and moved nearby, but they didn't. However, it's common to hear that boys don't keep in touch much, so I resigned myself to it. Then one day, Jack and Sarah suddenly came to my house. We have a favor to ask. What's going on? Well, we need to borrow some money. Money? Why? I raised my voice, fearing the worst. Like a debt. Jack and Sarah looked apologetic and shrugged. We're thinking of starting infertility treatments. Infertility treatments? Yeah, it's been 3 years since we got married, and we haven't had a child yet. We thought it's time to consider it. That's true, but Sarah, you're still in your 20s. Isn't it too early to worry? Sarah responded anxiously. It's physically challenging. If it's too late, and just because we start treatments doesn't mean we'll have a child right away. That's a good point. I've heard it can take years. I had no idea they were seriously struggling with this. The thing is, infertility treatments are quite expensive. Sarah works at a grocery store.
But honestly, it's tough. I had heard about infertility treatments on TV. It's a difficult journey that requires a lot of time and money, as I heard from those who've been through it. I wanted to see my grandchild and help my son Jack if he was in trouble. So, I nodded in agreement to Jack and Sarah's request. I understand. I'll support you both as much as I can. But how much do you need? Actually, we need about $2,500 a month. $2,500 a month? It was not a small amount for me. It was more than what James sends me every month. However, with my savings and part-time job, it wasn't an impossible amount. We'll definitely pay you back, please. I've always had a soft spot for Jack's requests. Jack was finally reaching out to me. Being there for him is what a parent does. All right, I'll deposit it into your bank account each month. Okay, Jack. That would help a lot. Thanks, Mom. Thank you, Amanda. Jack and Sarah left, looking happy. Upon reflection, I had one question: was $2,500 a month really necessary for infertility treatments? Yet, considering additional expenses like diet and medical visits, I thought it might be necessary. 6 months later, the monthly payments of $2,500 to Jack were not easy. While I could manage with James's remittances and my part-time income, I had to be more frugal than before. So, I went shopping at a discount grocery store a bit far from home. On my way back, passing a casino, I spotted 2 familiar faces, Jack and Sarah. Jack and Sarah were entering that casino. Could it be a mistake? Curious, I decided to follow them. I went inside and looked for them. The place was crowded, and just as I was about to give up, I spotted Jack exiting the restroom. I followed them from a distance, unnoticed. Jack and Sarah were excitedly discussing something. They sat at a table and started playing. There was Jack, a side I had never seen before. The game ended quickly. Jack and Sarah seemed upset, probably having lost. I doubted whether they were really undergoing infertility treatments. They should be using their money for treatment, not gambling. They should have managed their finances before borrowing from me. Wanting to confront them, I approached as they left the casino. Jack, Sarah, can we talk for a moment? What, Mom? They turned around, surprised, their faces strained. What's this? You have money to gamble? Well, we just came to relax a bit. Relax? You seemed quite experienced, though. Oh, that's... I used to come here with friends during college. College, huh? The more I heard, the more suspicious it seemed. So, you don't usually gamble? No, we're just stressed, thinking about fertility treatments. That must be tough. But you seem quite knowledgeable. Is it really your first time since college? Jack began to fidget irritably under my questioning. Are you doubting me? It's not that, but it's shocking to see you coming out of a casino when you said you couldn't afford treatments. I haven't heard much about the treatment either. Oh, you're so annoying. Jack scratched his head and sighed. Exaggeratedly, shut up. All that infertility treatment talk was a lie, so all the money so far went to gambling. Obviously, if we hit it big, we'll be billionaires. It's stupid not to try such a dream. Jack and Sarah showed no remorse for deceiving me, laughing mockingly. I felt betrayed after worrying so much for Jack. I was ready to do anything for him, but he exploited my feelings. Well then, you won't be needing any more money from me. What are you talking about? If you're not undergoing treatments, you don't need it, right? Well, don't expect a penny from us when we become billionaires. Jack crossed his arms and looked down on me. Sarah continued with a smug smile, by the way, we've already spent all the money you gave us, so there's none left. We can't pay it back. Too bad for you. Jack and Sarah said mockingly, then turned their backs and left without another word. I was speechless with a sense of punishment. Despite having transferred about $10,000 to them over the past few months, this was their attitude. If I let them continue their reckless behavior, it would lead to irreparable consequences. That's why I decided to stop sending money to Jack. 2 months later, James was returning home temporarily. I prepared his favorite soup and pasta, waiting for him. As soon as he arrived, James burst out, "Where's the money I've been sending you every month?" Jack and Sarah look malnourished. What do you mean? I was stunned and stared at James, not understanding what he was talking about. I've been saving the money. Why are Jack and Sarah malnourished? Don't play, D. You borrowed money from Jack, right? He contacted me, saying they can't afford proper meals. The photos he sent showed both of them terribly thin. What are you talking about? I can't believe you. Aren't you ashamed as a parent? I've been sending enough money so you wouldn't have financial troubles, and yet you're borrowing money from our son. What are you doing? James was furious, blaming me for everything. However, I had never borrowed money from Jack, it was all a lie. I was shocked that James completely believed Jack's words and didn't trust me. But I couldn't let Jack and Sarah's lies continue. I decided to reveal everything to James. James, I understand you want to believe in Jack, but can you look at these bank statements? What about them? This is the money you've been sending me every month. What, you have plenty of money. James looked puzzled as he examined the statement. That's right. I'm not struggling for money. And look here, did you send money to Jack? Yes, until recently, I was sending Jack $2,500 every month. That much. Were you okay with your living expenses? Relieved that James had calmed down, I continued. I managed with my part-time job and savings. I had saved quite a bit. Looking at the remaining balance, he could see I hadn't wasted money. Then why give Jack money? He said they wanted to start infertility treatments. Infertility treatments? Yes, they've been married for 3 years without a child, so they asked for money for treatments. That's why I lent money to them. James was surprised, having not heard about the treatments Jack and Sarah claimed to my husband. That they didn't have enough money to live because of me. So why did you stop the payments? It was all a lie. They weren't going to the clinic. Then where did the money go? This is it, the casino they went to happened to be on TV. It showed people mingling. You don't mean they used some money for gambling? They lied to try and get money from me too. James stared in disbelief at the TV. That's when it happened. Hey, isn't that Jack and Sarah? Oh my gosh, it is. I never thought they would ever go back. Jack and Sarah appeared on the screen. I thought they would restrain themselves after I stopped the payments, but they couldn't quit gambling. Unbelievable. The photos they sent me showed them looking so thin. They haven't changed at all. Nowadays you can edit photos with apps, you know. James realized he had been deceived, hung his head in dismay. Maybe his return home was also for Jack and Sarah's sake. After a moment of shock, James looked up, determined. Unacceptable. I need to have a serious talk with them. Saying that, he headed for the door. Where are you going? To Jack's house, of course. I'm going to confront them. In a rage, James was about to leave for Jack's house, but I quickly stopped him. It's pointless to go now. Now, why? They're at the casino and won't be back until evening. Plus, if you're going, you need to be prepared. I smiled at James. It was time to prepare something special that I had kept hidden until now. In the evening, when we thought Jack and Sarah would be home by now, James and I headed to Jack's house. When James rang the doorbell, Jack and Sarah appeared, looking flustered. What? Why is Dad here? Aren't you supposed to be overseas? I heard you two were in trouble, so I came back. You both seem quite well, though. Contrary to the photos James had shown me, Jack and Sarah looked perfectly healthy but strained. Struggling for food and money, right? Are you okay now?
Yeah.
Some colleagues at my work have been helping us out. I see you've been lending money to Mom, right? How much did you lend her? Pressed by James, Jack glanced at me. He scratched his head and said, That's right. Mom owes me over $10,000, and she hasn't paid back a cent. What do you think, Dad? Terrible, right? Facing Jack's resolve to stick to his lies, I let go of any remaining affection? That's awful. Do you have any proof? No proof. I lend it to her because she's family, but she's not paying it back. Jack's fake tears were matched with Sarah's concurrence. We're struggling too, so we told her we couldn't lend her more money. She got angry, saying we're family but won't help. Is that true, Amanda? I did lend money, but I never borrowed any. I assertively denied their claims. Jack and Sarah's protest grew louder. Lies. She's deceiving you, Dad. Don't believe Amanda. James looked at them coldly, clearly fed up. I had no time for their charade. To end this, I took out the evidence from my bag. Look at this, my bank statements and the promissory notes. I had them right when lending money to me. That's a lie, Jack stammered, trying to grab the evidence from me, but I handed it all to James. In fact, I showed them all at home, but James reacted as if he's seeing them for the first time. What's this? You borrowed money from Mom? That's not what I heard. There's a reason for that. Jack stiffened as James's voice grew colder. James, always strict, must have instilled fear in him. Sweating profusely, Jack struggled for words. It was for gambling money, right? What are you talking about, Mom? That's ridiculous. Really, but you were on TV today. I showed them photos from my phone. I recorded a snippet of the show on my phone. Jack and Sarah appeared several times.
Welcome to my channel, where every story comes to life. Dive into captivating narratives that spark your imagination. Let's start today, new narrative story. Meet Ethan Ramirez, a 38-year-old entrepreneur who lived in the vibrant city of Seattle. For the past decade, Ethan had been building his business and his life with his wife, Isabella, who was 34 and worked as a high-powered marketing executive. Together, they had 2 young children, a boy and a girl, and from the outside looking in, they had the perfect life. Their friends often commented on how lucky they were, how strong their marriage seemed, and how nothing could come between them. But Ethan started noticing subtle changes over the past 6 months. Isabella was more distant, often lost in thought, and more attached to her phone than usual. She'd tell him about work events, late-night meetings, and the occasional girls' night out, which he trusted at first. But the way she'd smile down at her phone, the texts she never shared, and the increase in her work obligations gnawed at Ethan's intuition. Still, Ethan didn't want to jump to conclusions. His friends told him that marriages go through phases, that the demands of work and kids can make things feel distant at times. But late at night, when Isabella was sleeping beside him, he'd lie awake, wondering if there was more to her behavior than just stress. The tipping point came when Isabella's boss, Luke, a 40-year-old tech CEO, invited them both to an exclusive networking event at his luxurious penthouse in downtown Seattle. Luke was the type of man who exuded confidence and power, a slick, well-dressed executive who always had a smirk that never sat well with Ethan. He was successful, charismatic, and seemed to have the perfect life, much like Ethan. But there was something about the way Luke looked at Isabella at these events, the way his hand lingered just a little too long on her shoulder when they greeted each other. Ethan brushed it off. After all, what kind of man would invite a couple to a party if he was having an affair with the wife? Yet a small, nagging voice in Ethan's head told him to stay vigilant. On the night of the party, Ethan and Isabella arrived at Luke's penthouse, which boasted sweeping views of the city skyline. The space was filled with well-dressed professionals, clinking glasses of champagne, and a band playing smooth jazz in the background. Isabella looked stunning in a sleek black dress, her makeup flawless, her smile radiant. Ethan couldn't help but feel proud to have her by his side, but that nagging feeling still lingered. As the night progressed, Isabella mingled effortlessly, catching up with co-workers, including Luke, who was his usual charming self. Ethan kept a close eye on them, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. That was until about an hour into the party, when Isabella excused herself, saying she needed to catch up with a friend in a quieter part of the penthouse. Ethan nodded, not wanting to appear suspicious, but this time he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Instead of following her immediately, Ethan decided to give her a bit of space. He mingled with a few guests, trying to distract himself from the gnawing suspicion that was building inside him. But after 15 minutes, curiosity got the best of him. He excused himself from a conversation, quietly slipping away from the crowded living room. Wandering through the halls of Luke's sprawling penthouse, Ethan eventually made his way to a dimly lit back garden area secluded from the main party. There, in the soft glow of the garden lights, he froze as he overheard voices. He immediately recognized one as Luke's, smooth, cocky, and slightly tipsy. The other voice belonged to a man he didn't recognize. But what caught Ethan's attention was the conversation. "I don't know how she does it, man. Isabella can slip out of her husband's arms and into mine like it's nothing. Last weekend was insane. We met up at that hotel near the waterfront. You wouldn't believe what happened. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Did he hear that correctly? He moved closer, careful not to make a sound, his heart pounding in his chest as he listened in disbelief. Does her husband know anything? I mean, you're playing with fire here, man, the other voice said. Nah, Luke replied confidently. Ethan's too busy with his business to even notice. And besides, Isabella knows how to keep secrets. She's smarter than most women I've been with. Ethan's hands trembled. His worst fears were being confirmed right before his ears. His wife, the woman he trusted above all others, was having an affair with her boss. And the way Luke spoke about her, as if she were just another conquest in his string of affairs, filled Ethan with rage, but he wasn't the type to confront in the heat of the moment. He would be smart about this. Ethan stayed hidden, listening for as long as he could. He learned that their affair had been going on for nearly 6 months, with secret hotel meetings, late-night phone calls, and business trips that were really just excuses for their rendezvous. By the time Ethan slipped away from the garden, he had heard enough. That night, Ethan returned home with Isabella, acting as if nothing had changed. He smiled, laughed, and made small talk, all the while his mind was spinning with a plan. He wasn't going to confront her right away. He needed evidence, cold, hard proof. And so, over the next few days, Ethan became a different man. He became strategic, careful, and methodical in his approach. He installed tracking apps on Isabella's phone without her knowing, hacked into her email accounts, and even hired a private investigator. Over the next 2 weeks, he gathered everything he needed: text messages between her and Luke, photos of them at hotels, and even phone records that confirmed what he had overheard at the party. With each piece of evidence that came in, Ethan's heart broke a little more. But his resolve grew stronger. He wasn't going to just confront her. He was going to make sure that when this all came to light, it would be unforgettable. A month after the first party, Luke was throwing another event, and this time Ethan knew it would be the perfect setting for his revenge. This party was bigger, with even more high-profile guests in attendance. Ethan arrived with Isabella, playing the role of the doting husband, while she remained blissfully unaware of what was about to happen. Halfway through the night, Ethan excused himself from a conversation, telling Isabella he was going to make a toast. She smiled at him, completely unaware of the storm that was about to hit. As Ethan took the microphone, the room grew quiet, with all eyes on him. Isabella stood beside Luke, her smile faltering slightly as Ethan's gaze locked onto hers. "I'd like to make a toast to my incredible wife, Isabella," he began, his voice calm and measured. "For 10 years we've shared our lives, built a family, and created memories I thought would last forever." The room was silent, the air thick with tension as Ethan continued. "But sometimes life surprises you. Sometimes the people you trust the most turn out to have secrets they keep hidden." Isabella's face turned pale as her eyes widened in shock. She tried to step forward, but Ethan held up a hand, stopping her in her tracks. "And tonight, in front of all of you, I'd like to share one of those secrets." With a press of a button, the large projector screen behind him lit up with images. The room gasped as pictures of Isabella and Luke appeared, photos of them sneaking into hotels, texts exchanged between them, even audio recordings of their late-night calls. Ethan had left no stone unturned. Isabella stood frozen, her face ashen, while Luke tried to make a quick exit, but the crowd had already turned on them. Ethan looked directly at them, his voice calm but with an edge of finality. "In the end, secrets never stay hidden for long, and now everyone knows the truth." The fallout was swift and brutal. Within days, Ethan had filed for divorce, secured full custody of the kids, and ensured that Luke's reputation was ruined. The affair became public knowledge, and Luke was forced to resign from his company amidst the scandal. As for Isabella, she lost everything: her marriage, her standing in the community, and the trust of everyone around her. Ethan, meanwhile, found a sense of peace. He had rebuilt his life from the ashes of betrayal, stronger than ever. In the end, the best revenge wasn't just exposing the truth, it was reclaiming his happiness. Wow, what a ride! Thanks for joining us on this intense journey of betrayal and ultimate revenge. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and leave a comment below. We'd love to hear what you think. And of course, don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell icon so you never miss another incredible story from Reddit Stories Unveiled. What would you have done if you were in Ethan's shoes? Let us know in the comments, and we'll see you next time.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
My name is Henry Bishop, and I was 29 years old when my life completely shattered. I had been married for 5 years, but we didn't have children, and we hadn't even discussed starting a family. Standing at 6 feet half an inch and weighing 180 pounds, I had blue eyes and prematurely graying hair. Though people would tell me the gray made me look interesting, not older. I worked as a bank equipment repair technician, which is a specialized field blending locksmithing and electronic maintenance. My work involved fixing drive-through systems, vaults, and security cabinets, and I also had the occasional task of opening safe deposit boxes when customers misplaced their keys. One afternoon, I was wrapping up a job when a storm rolled through, knocking out power in the area where the bank I had been servicing was located. The radio announced that no repairs would be started until the storm passed, which wouldn't be until the next morning. So, I decided to leave early and head home. I didn't call my wife on the way back for a few reasons. First, there was no cell coverage in the area due to the storm. Second, I don't use my phone while driving. Third, and most importantly, I was angry with her. For the past few months, she'd been nitpicking about the smallest issues, and at times, creating problems where there weren't any. She had used sex as a way to manipulate me in the past, and I had finally had enough. This time, I was planning to put my foot down and give her an ultimatum. Get help, or I was done. The drive was tough through the storm, but once I was clear of it, I made better time and was soon pulling into the driveway. As I approached, I decided not to open the garage door and park my car inside. I wasn't sure if I'd be unloading my things and leaving for good. I decided to go in through the kitchen door instead. It was locked, which struck me as odd. I unlocked it and stepped inside, noticing a trail of clothes leading out of the kitchen. My gut twisted as I realized this was likely the beginning of a reckoning I hadn't anticipated. I grabbed my phone and switched on the video camera, following the trail of clothes through the house. It led me to the guest bedroom, where I was shocked to find my wife, Clara, with her boss, David, in a compromising situation. This was beyond anything I had ever imagined. Clara had always been very vocal about her beliefs, including her stance on certain things she considered inappropriate or wrong. The sight before me was a stark contrast to everything she had ever said about those boundaries. I stood frozen in the doorway for a few moments, processing the reality of what I was witnessing. Then I heard Clara's voice, saying things I never thought I would hear from her. This is only for you, David. Henry won't be part of this, not until I'm sure I'm pregnant with your child. Then we'll see him, thinking he's in control while we carry on behind his back. The weight of her words hit me like a punch to the gut, and I quickly realized the depth of the betrayal I was facing. It wasn't just about the physical act, it was the emotional and mental manipulation behind it all. In that moment, I knew things were never going to be the same again. The rest of her rant was drowned out by her cries of pleasure. I filmed everything I needed, and as David finished, I cleared my throat. Don't mind me, just here to grab some things, I said. I'll be packing up my stuff and moving out. David, you might want to stay here a while. I'll need to move my car from blocking the driveway first. The looks of shock and fear on their faces were priceless. I raised my phone and added, I've already uploaded this video to the cloud. I'm sure your wives and bosses will love to see it. Both of you should consider finding new jobs too, considering the employee manual's non-fraternization policy you clearly violated. As I turned to head toward the master bedroom, I called out with a sinister laugh, carry on, I won't interrupt until I need to. As I packed up my things, I could hear scrambling from the guest room. At first, I tried to ignore it, but soon the sounds of shouting and slapping reached me. When I went to investigate, I found David on the floor, curled up in a ball, clutching his crotch. Clara stood above him, yelling, "Slap me again. You son of a bitch, and I'll kick you harder." I was tempted to step in, but Clara seemed to have the situation under control. Instead, I decided to go for some extra revenge. I stepped over David's cowering form, blew Clara a mock air kiss, and began collecting David's belongings. In his pockets, I found his wallet, car keys, and cell phone. I pocketed his phone and removed his credit cards, office access card, driver's license, and any pictures of his family. I left the cash behind so he wouldn't accuse me of taking that. I also found an emergency contact card with his wife's number and home address. I called her from his phone, telling her that her husband seemed to have sustained an injury to his groin and might have trouble walking. I gave her my address, and she said she'd be there in 15 minutes. I then gathered David's clothes, stuffed them into a trash bag, and made my way out to my car, where I locked the doors securely. I returned to the house, heading straight to our home office. After scanning David's driver's license into my computer, I shredded it along with the rest of his cards. I then proceeded to download the video from my phone and sent a copy to my work email account as a backup. I packed up the computer, printer, and Wi-Fi router, placing them carefully in my car. When I went back inside to finish packing, Clara tried to block my way as I moved toward the master bedroom. She was no match for me physically, so I simply wrapped my arm around her waist, picked her up, and carried her back into the guest room without a word. It took me 3 trips to gather up as many of my clothes as I could, everything I wanted to keep and everything I didn't want destroyed. I made sure to take all of my pants and underwear, along with the shirts I cared about, leaving behind only some old, worn-out t-shirts. I didn't want David to have anything of mine, not even if it was too small for him to wear. If he was going to be in my house, I wasn't going to make it easy for him to cover himself. As I finished packing, I saw Clara sitting on the bed in the guest room, crying uncontrollably. She was babbling apologies, insisting it was all a mistake. But nothing she said mattered anymore. I didn't engage with her. Instead, I went straight for my gun safe. I gathered my weapons, locked them safely inside the pistol case, and packed them into the car. I was done with this. As I was packing the trunk of my car with my weapons, I noticed David's wife, Isla, pull up to the house. Without a word, I pointed toward the door and told her to go right in. I explained that David was in the hallway near the bedrooms, giving her all the information she needed. With that, I climbed into my car and drove away, not bothering to look back. I headed straight for my hunting cabin, preparing myself for what I expected to be a long, quiet retreat away from the chaos I had just left behind. I first met Clara during a time when I was still reeling from a broken engagement. My former fiancée had decided I wasn't wealthy enough for her tastes, and she quickly found herself a stockbroker to marry. That marriage didn't last long, though, as she moved on to a new man who could offer her even more money. By the time I crossed paths with Clara, she was already on her 3rd marriage in under 6 years. She hadn't exactly learned from her past, but neither had I. I was still nursing a broken heart when I first saw Clara. I was heading to an attorney's office to settle my grandfather's estate. She worked as a security desk attendant at the building entrance, and she made a strong impression on me from the start. It was just before lunchtime, and as I was leaving, I found myself asking her if she wanted to grab a bite to eat. To my surprise and delight, she agreed. That simple lunch turned into a lot more than I expected, and before I knew it, we were entangled in a relationship. Looking back, I can't say I ever really stood a chance. Clara had a knack for drawing people in, even when they weren't the right fit. At lunch, we talked and we told each other our life's highlights. Clara was 21 and going to night school to study to get her real estate license. I told her that I was in town to clear up my grandfather's estate. She seemed to perk up at that and asked if I had gotten anything. My eyebrows went up and I asked back if she was rich, and that just kind of set her back. She apologized, saying of course it is none of my business, forgive me for asking. I laughed and also apologized for the nosy question. I then said that my grandfather had left me his hunting camp with a piece of otherwise useless property. I did not tell her of the money he left. Something about that question about the estate seemed to be improper. She was a great conversationalist and had the ability to bring people out of their comfort zone with interesting insight. We got along great, and after I settled the bill, I asked her if she would like to go to dinner the weekend that was coming up. She agreed as long as I did not go overboard. The dinner went well, and we continued dating for the next 2 months. I did not push for any intimacy because she was dating others. I asked Clara if she wanted to be exclusive, and she thought for a few seconds and said yes. Then she asked if that was why I had not made any moves beyond deep kisses. I said yes. We became intimate about 2 weeks after that, and we both seemed satisfied. The sex got better and better, the relationship blossomed, and after another 5 months, I asked her to marry me. She agreed but wanted to wait until she had her real estate license. As she only had about 4 months to go before she would finish her licensing course, I did not see it as a problem, so I agreed. I finally met Clara's parents and found them to be very nice people. Her father, Miles, seemed to be down to earth. He confessed to liking his single malt after work and liked fishing, golf, and poker. When I told him I was not much of a fisherman, but that I liked boating, hunting, and poker, he laughed and said he would be glad to take my money. I gave it right back and said bring double what you usually do because I don't lose. We laughed and went into the summer porch and had a drink. I got ribbed again when I just had a soft drink. But when I told him that even the alcohol and mouthwash made me sick, he backed off. Clara's mother, Margot, call me Marg, was a sweetheart. She was a slightly shorter version of Clara. Unfortunately, she died of a heart attack about 6 months after the wedding. She was only 46. Clara mourned for about 9 months, but Miles never got over it. He finally moved to Florida and we heard from him occasionally, but never saw him again. After we settled into our house, Clara found a job as a real estate agent. She needed 2 years of experience before she could be licensed as a broker. I never did figure out what the difference was. After those 2 years, she moved from one office to a local office of a national chain. David was the office manager. I got the feeling that I should count my fingers and check his other hand for a knife every time he shook my hand. He was a slimy scumsucker, but a natural-born salesman. Things did not start going bad between Clara and me until she had been in that office for about 18 months. She received a promotion to assistant office manager, got a small percentage of commission on all the sales generated by the agents, a larger percentage commission on her own sales, and a raise. I started noticing that other than her normal paycheck, no money was going into the household account. Her wardrobe and jewelry collection got much more expensive, and her spending increased. She started to put business expenses and client entertainment expenses on the house credit card, but I never saw any expense checks to cover those charges. I put a stop to that by canceling all of our joint credit cards and telling her if she needed a credit card to go get a business card or one in her name only, but I would not sign it as a co-owner or user. I also gave her a debit card, one without ATM access. I told her I would reload it as needed, but I would need to see receipts. I then told her that until I saw all of her income going into the household account, I would give her an itemized list for 1/2 of each month's expenses, and if she did not pay it, then I would not renew the debit card. Well, that went over like a turd floating in the chowder. I got the silent treatment for about 3 weeks. When I presented her with a bill for half of the household expenses, she got the hint that I was serious. After that, we got into a chilly but semi-cordial relationship. Sex was out of the question until I had enough and went to the cabin for 2 weeks without telling her. When she finally called my company's secretary and asked to have me call her, I did. She was all weepy and apologetic about the troubles between us. I told her that if she ever used sex as a weapon again, it would not matter if she won the largest prize in lottery history. We were done. I then gave her the warning. If you think I am fooling, look in your purse for credit cards I can use. I went back to the house, but I made some changes. I took the king-size bed out of the master bedroom and put it up in the rafters in the garage. I replaced it with 2 3/4 full beds and told Clara that if she did not use sex as a weapon, or for revenge for the next year, I would replace the king. I also told her that any excess income one had over and above what she put into the household account was going into a separate account that she would not be able to access. She started to get all mad again. I stopped her and told her to think about that because the cabin was now set up so I could live there. She shut up. About 3 months after that, I came upon the bedroom scene. I moved into the cabin, contacted my company about my address change, and looked for a good divorce lawyer. The divorce went through. Clara signed under protest, but I mentioned a certain video I still had. When the judge heard of the cause of my filing, he granted the petition. He then mandated splitting everything 60-40 in my favor. Clara owed me about $180,000 from her commissions that she tried to hide. Plus, I was to receive 60% of the proceeds of the sale of the house or 60% of the greater of 2 independent appraisals of what the selling price would be if she decided to keep it. He specifically ordered that any appraisal must be from a licensed appraiser not used by Clara's firm. There were a couple of companies, and when the appraisals came in with only a few $100 difference, I told Clara that if she wanted the house, I would accept half of the lower appraisal. She wanted the house, so I got just under $325,000 from the house plus the amount from the hidden monies. Clara and David were both fired and were forced to pay back any hours they were paid for that they did not work. David received a divorce notice about a week after I told Isla to come and pick him up. It seems that Isla owned the office franchise, and David was basically screwed in our town because no one wanted to cross her once she threatened to remove her office from the multi-listing service that most of the local real estate offices use to sell each other's properties. David left town, and Isla rehired Clara, but only as an agent. Because of the money and what I had from my grandfather, I decided to quit my service job and try doing what I had always wanted to do: teach. As I did not have a college degree, I offered online courses in blacksmithing and lock security. It did not provide me with a lot of income, but it gave me a lot of satisfaction. I also found time to write. That turned out to be very lucrative. I was living in the cabin for about 2 years when we had a winter storm that knocked out power for several counties surrounding the cabin. I had equipped the cabin for something like this. I had a standby generator with an automatic switchover control. I had a 2-place snowmobile with a sled for towing, a 4-place UTV, and a small trailer. The cabin was well above the 500-year flood mark, but I had an inflatable boat in the rafters in the garage. I had enough food for 4 to 6 people for a couple of months. My well was a free-flowing deep well, so water was not a problem unless the generator quit. I was worried about both sets of neighbors, an elderly couple taking care of an abandoned granddaughter, and a single mother with 2 young children. I went to the garage and fired up the snowmobile. I first checked on the couple, and they still had power because they too had a generator. I then went to see the other neighbors. Janice, the mother, was in a major panic. Her daughter, Isla, who was 5, and the oldest child was frantic about the total darkness of their house. The younger child, Miles, who was 3, was sound asleep as only a young child can be. I offered to take them to my place. Jan was not sure, as she did not want to put me out. After I explained that my cabin had 4 bedrooms, and only I and my dog were living there, she would not be putting me out. She got a little less certain that they would be imposing. I also told her that the last time the power went out, it was out for 4 days, because our country road only had our 3 families on this power spur. I also told her about the propane power generator that had at least 3 weeks of fuel. That sold her. I had brought several battery-powered lanterns, so she had lights to see to pack up a week's worth of clothes for the kids. I warned her to take extra blankets and any winter coats she had for herself, and the kids, as the ride back to my cabin was going to be cold. The ride back had the kids wrapped up and bungee corded to the sled. Janice was holding on to me for dear life. The ride was only about 20 minutes, and I was going as slow as I could to keep the wind chill at a respectable level. When we arrived at my cabin, I opened the door, turned on the lights, sat Jan down on the couch, and I went out to get the kids. Isla started laughing when we got inside and the lights were on. Miles slept through it all. The storm lasted for 2 days, and when it finally stopped there were almost 24 inches of snow. I took the kids for a couple of snowmobile rides to keep them entertained. Janice and I discovered that we got along well, and I found out a lot about her circumstances. At the time she was 26 and had never been married, but had lived with the kids' father for almost 7 years. She would still be with him, but he got involved with drugs and spent all of their money for his next fix. Janice gave him an ultimatum: clean up or get out. He left, and Janice went home to her parents for a few months. She found a job as a secretary in an office. Her resident a-hole decided to fix the problem by going back to the apartment where they had been living and breaking down the door and start shooting. Unfortunately for him, the new resident was a cop and he shot back. The jerk was severely injured, and after his arrest and trial, he was sentenced to 12 years in prison. After we managed to clear a path from my cabin to theirs, we found that the roof had collapsed. The only things that were salvageable were the clothes and some stuffed animals, and even they were frozen from the cold. We loaded the UTV and trailer with all of the stuff and returned to my cabin. Janice was distraught. I grabbed Janice, Isla, and Miles in a group hug and told them they would stay with me for as long as they needed and wanted. I told them that since they had moved and I had come to love them like I was their daddy. I got hugs from the 2 ladies, and a big laugh and a "you're a funny daddy" from Miles. I had to leave and go into the bedroom to not let the kids see my tears. Because of the storm damage, they were stuck at my place. Then to make things worse, her boss gave her an ultimatum: get to work or lose her job. She tried to explain to him that she had no way to get into the city. I took the phone away from her and said to the a-hole, "She is giving her 5-minute notice because I just hired her." Jan looked at me like I had a third eye in the middle of my forehead. I told her to relax. If she wanted her old job, she could find a secretarial position almost anywhere. I explained that I needed someone who could transcribe my scribbles into readable text. I showed her my library of published books. I offered $35,000 per year. She swallowed hard and asked if I was serious. I assured her that I was very serious. I showed her the 3 books I was writing at the time. She looked at my scribbles and laughingly asked, "Did you write this in Sanskrit? Miles makes clearer scribbles than this. You really do need me, don't you?" When spring came, Janice wanted to find someone to fix her cabin. She was not sure where she was going to get the money. I told her that if she wanted to leave, I would finance the repairs, or they could stay with me and we would continue as we have been. I told her I wanted them to stay because they brought me a lot of joy and completed me. Janice started to cry, and I just looked around for a place to escape. As I started to move away, Jan grabbed me and said, "Yes, yes, yes, you idiot, haven't you figured out that I love you? You have treated me and my kids like royalty and offered your home to us. Now you say you want us here. Yes, yes, yes." She then hugged me and gave me a deep and long kiss. I hugged and kissed her back. I said, "We have to talk when you settle down," but I mean every word I said. Things went very smoothly. My writing suddenly sped up because of fewer rewrites. Janice was happy. The kids were happy. My publishers were happy, and I was ecstatic. Then I asked Janice to marry me. She hesitated for a long enough time that I felt the need to make a comment. I told her, "I'm sorry. I thought that you said you loved me. Don't say no. I will not ask again. I'm sorry I made you uncomfortable." Janice started crying. laughing and hiccuping all at the same time. She grabbed me and said, "Oh, you silly man, you just surprised me." "Yes, yes, yes." "When?" I hugged her back. I said, "Do you have a preference for a church to get married in?" "I don't have any church, and even the village judge would be fine with me." She took a step back from me and looked me right in the eyes. "Listen here, you loving man. I will get married to you naked in the village square if we can do it tomorrow. I think that as the people in this little area have been my only friends for as long as I have lived here, the village judge is perfect for me. Let's talk to him in the morning." We went into the village and stopped at the village office to get a marriage license. The clerk came out and hugged Janice and then took all the information. The judge asked if the next Saturday was a good day. My lady replied, "Any day is a good day. Yesterday would be better, but yes, Saturday is good." My bride was beautiful. Isla was a bridesmaid and Miles was the ring bearer. The next best thing was when the kids called me daddy. The whole village, it seems, decided that we were a good show and showed up to wish us well. Good things, as well as bad things, can come from storms. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
When I first met Anne, we were young, ambitious, and full of hope. Our relationship grew quickly, built on shared dreams and late-night talks that lasted until sunrise. We married in our early 20s, moving into a cramped apartment with leaky faucets and noisy neighbors. It didn't matter. We were madly in love. Over time, our bond deepened, and we supported each other through thick and thin. Anne had always been the driven one, and her ambition was something I admired. It wasn't until years later that I'd realize how that drive could overshadow everything else. As we moved into our first home, life became more comfortable. I worked in IT, a job I found fulfilling, if not thrilling. Anne's career in real estate took off, and her charm and determination won over clients left and right. We started using little notes on a chalkboard in our kitchen, playful messages, reminders of dinner plans, or silly inside jokes. These small gestures of love became a cherished tradition. But as Anne's career evolved and eventually her foray into politics began, things started to change. Slowly, those notes of affection turned into curt updates. Out late, busy tomorrow, or nothing at all. The slap came out of nowhere, sending me reeling. My head buzzed as I staggered backward, hand instinctively touching my cheek. "What the hell is going on?" I shouted, my voice echoing in the otherwise silent kitchen. "Hold on, let me backtrack a few weeks to make sense of this." It was just after 4 p.m., the time I usually get home from work, when I came in through the garage and walked into the kitchen. My job has a lot of UK clients, so I start my day at 7 a.m. to align with their schedules. It took some adjusting, but I've grown to like it. As usual, I glanced at the bulletin board. There was only one note. Working late. Great, another dinner alone. When Anne and I first got married and lived in a tiny apartment, we used a chalkboard in the kitchen to keep track of our schedules. When we moved into a house, the tradition continued. Back then, we left silly, affectionate messages. I once wrote, "I can't wait to get home, Cookie. I miss you already." She replied, "I miss you more, and stop calling me Cookie." The nickname came from when we first met at a bakery, but as her career took off, she didn't want others knowing I called her that. Still, I struggled to stop. Sure, it might sound corny, but those notes mattered to me. Now they've been replaced by clipped updates, like today's "working late." I'm not blind. I know relationships can lose their spark over time, but this felt like more than just routine. It wasn't just the absence of love notes. We barely spent time together anymore. My early work hours didn't help, but her job as a realtor made things even harder. She's constantly on call, handling paperwork at 9 p.m. or hosting open houses all weekend. Her schedule seems to belong to everyone but us. 2 years ago, Anne decided to run for city council. I tried to dissuade her, but her friends and colleagues kept encouraging her. At first, I wasn't too worried since the incumbent had won 2/3 of the vote in the previous election. Then, halfway through the campaign, his wife suffered a stroke, and he withdrew to care for her. Before I knew it, Anne had taken his seat. Her new role came with more than just monthly meetings. She started meeting constituents, joining task forces, and tackling the endless duties of an elected official. On election night, when she won re-election, I stood proudly by her side. She seemed so happy, and I was happy for her. But as the weeks passed, our time together became scarce. When I brought it up, she grew defensive, accusing me of jealousy and being unsupportive. That wasn't the worst of it. Over the past year, her attitude toward me had shifted. She seemed colder, sometimes even condescending. It wasn't obvious or overt, It was just a feeling that gnawed at me. I thought about it often during my downtime, and it left me in a bad place. I missed the time we used to spend together and resented how her responsibilities had taken over. I still remembered one night when we'd just gotten to bed, only for her real estate client to call with an emergency. That moment still stung. But to be fair, I'd also canceled plans before due to my own work emergencies. Now, sitting at the kitchen table, I wondered if I was being unfair. Maybe I was just jealous of how much others needed her time. But my instincts told me there was more to it than conflicting schedules. When she first joined the council, she shared everything about her meetings and the mayor's office. Now she barely mentioned any of it. Was it because the novelty had worn off? Or worse, had she decided I wasn't worth talking to anymore? A dark thought crept in. Could she be having an affair? I immediately dismissed it. My cookie would never cheat. But the idea lingered, fitting too well with the questions I'd been avoiding. Was she really working late every night? Or could she be meeting someone else? Why didn't she tell me where she was going anymore? Was it indifference or secrecy? And why was she so condescending? Did she see me as pathetic, a husband unknowingly betrayed? These doubts wouldn't leave me alone. As I sat there, anger and suspicion grew. I needed to stop myself before doing something reckless. So, I threw on my old work clothes, grabbed the lawnmower, and worked on the yard until it was too dark to continue. The physical activity helped clear my head, and by the time I sat down for a dinner of leftovers, I had calmed down enough to form a plan. In my job, when network issues arise, I run diagnostics to identify the cause. I decided to apply the same approach to my marriage. But what tools could I use? I considered surveillance, microphones, cameras, or tracking devices, but quickly realized how impractical it would be. Anne was hardly home, and between her real estate events and council responsibilities, she was constantly on the move. Spying seemed both risky and unlikely to yield results. Reluctantly, I realized hiring a professional investigator was the best option, even if it might be expensive. I searched online for detective agencies, but the sheer number of options was overwhelming. Ratings and reviews didn't inspire much confidence. They could easily be fake. Frustrated, I wondered if Craigslist or Angie's List had a section for private investigators. Then I stumbled on a Channel 9 news story about local detective agencies. It reminded me that Amy Howard, the news director at Channel 9, was an old friend. We'd even dated briefly in college. Hoping she might help, I gave her a call. "Hey, Amy, long time no see. Any chance you're free for a beer tonight?" She sounded pleasantly surprised. "Dave, I think I can swing that. It's a slow news day, so unless something comes up, I'll be there." When she arrived, I couldn't help but notice how well she'd aged. She still had the charm that had first drawn me to her, now enhanced by the confidence of a successful professional. It suited her perfectly. Amy and I caught up on life and mutual friends, but after a while, I steered the conversation in a new direction. "Didn't you do a story on local detective agencies recently?" I asked. Amy gave me a knowing look and said, "Oh, Dave, I was wondering why you hadn't brought up Anne yet. Are you looking for recommendations?" I sighed and nodded. She paused thoughtfully before continuing. "With Anne's situation, you should avoid the larger agencies. More employees mean a higher risk of gossip. Does that make sense?" "Completely," I replied. She went on. "Also, steer clear of one-person operations. They're usually too stretched to handle things quickly. If you want something dependable, I'd recommend the Masterson Agency. They're not cheap, but they're professional, thorough, and they get results." She added, "The private detective world can be messy, but Masterson is a solid option." I thanked her and left feeling slightly more confident. The next morning, her advice still resonated, so I called Masterson. The receptionist told me I could meet Mr. Masterson himself if I came in first thing. "I'll be there," I promised, trying to steady my voice. That evening, Anne came home on time, and we had dinner together for the first time in days. Nervous about keeping up conversation, I didn't need to worry. She spent the evening ranting about a businessman planning to run against her. Her frustration filled the silence. The next morning, I left early, skipping breakfast, but leaving a note for Anne on the bulletin board. Traffic was light, and I arrived downtown earlier than expected. With time to spare, I stopped at Stranger Brew, my favorite coffee shop, for a coffee and breakfast sandwich to calm my nerves. As the cafe filled, a commotion drew my attention. A red-faced man was shouting at a young Latina woman sitting alone. "You're not done yet! What gives you the right to hog a table when others are waiting?" he bellowed, loud enough to turn heads. The woman sat frozen, stunned by his outburst. "You're a Mexican, aren't you?" he sneered. "Probably a wetback. You come here, take our jobs, and now our tables. Why don't you swim back across the Rio Grande?" He then knocked over her coffee, spilling it across the table. Before I knew it, I was standing between the man and the woman. "Leave her alone," I said firmly. "She was here first, and she has every right to sit here. You owe her a new coffee and an apology for your insults." The man's face darkened with anger, and he stepped closer. I braced for a confrontation, but before anything happened, the cafe owner appeared, holding a sawed-off pool cue. "You!" the owner barked, pointing at the man. "Get out of my shop and don't come back. You're not welcome here." The man muttered something about how the place sucked anyway before storming out. Once the tension settled, I turned to the woman. "I'm so sorry about that. Can I get you another coffee?" Maria Elena looked at me, her surprise evident. "You don't even know me. Why did you step in?" she asked. I shrugged casually. "I can't stand bullies or bigots," I replied. Her expression softened into a faint smile as she extended her hand. "I'm Maria Elena Alvarez. Thank you for standing up for me. It really means a lot." Taking her hand, I said, "You're welcome. I'm David Davis, and I'm glad I could help." The cafe owner returned then with 2 fresh coffees. "These are on the house. I'm sorry for what happened and hope you both feel welcome here in the future." Maria Elena and I thanked him, and she turned to me. "Would you like to have coffee with me? It'll free up your table." "I'd love to," I replied, sitting across from her. As we talked, she shared that she'd started a new job nearby and arrived early to avoid being late. "Do you come here often?" she asked. "Not as often as I'd like," I admitted. "I'm here today before a personal business meeting." She glanced at her watch. "I should get going," she said, standing and offering her hand. "Thank you again, David. It was a pleasure meeting you." "Likewise," I said, shaking her hand and watching her leave. After finishing my coffee, I left for my meeting at the Masterson agency. To my surprise, I spotted Maria walking in the same direction. When she stopped at a crosswalk, I caught up to her. She gave me a polite smile and nod, but as we continued walking, she glanced back again, her expression wary. "Great," I muttered to myself. "Now she thinks I'm following her." To my dismay, Maria entered the same building as the agency. I slowed down, hoping she'd be gone before I arrived, but when I walked in, she was in the lobby, arms crossed, staring at me suspiciously. "Look," she said as I approached, "I appreciate what you did at the cafe, but that doesn't give you the right to—" No, I interrupted. "I swear I'm not following you. I have an appointment in this building." Her eyes narrowed, but she stayed quiet and walked toward the elevator. I followed. When she pressed the button for the 4th floor, she glanced at me. "I'm headed to the 4th floor too," I admitted awkwardly. She frowned, but said nothing. When we exited, she strode down the hall and stopped at a door marked Employee Entrance. Before entering, her expression softened. "Good luck with your business, David," she said. "I get it now." "Thanks, Maria. And good luck with your new job," I replied. As I entered the agency, a new worry hit me. She must know why I'm here. Now, 2 people knew I needed a detective. The receptionist directed me to wait, and soon I was ushered into Bradley Masterson's office. If anyone fit the name Masterson, it was him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and exuded authority. Though I felt intimidated when we shook hands, his professionalism quickly put me at ease. He guided me through questions about my wife, her habits, my suspicions, and details I hadn't considered. It was clear he knew his work. After half an hour, he leaned back in his chair. "Your wife's public role makes surveillance easier. She's accustomed to being observed, so it won't raise suspicion." A warning bell went off in my mind. "Your team has to be discreet. If this leaks, it could cause a political scandal." He gave a confident smile. "Mr. Davis, discretion is our hallmark. Neither your wife nor anyone around her will know." Still uneasy, I asked, "What methods will you use? Audio, video, GPS?" Masterson leaned forward, arms crossed, and fixed me with a sharp stare. "I won't disclose that. I don't want you looking for devices or inadvertently alerting her. I also don't want you conducting your own surveillance. Stick to your normal routine. We're professionals. Amateurs getting involved only mess things up. Do I make myself clear?" His bluntness stunned me. "Crystal clear," I replied. Then something else struck me. "You said 2 weeks. You really think you can get answers that fast?" Masterson leaned back and smiled. "You've noticed a big change in your wife's behavior over the past 6 months. If she's having an affair, this is likely its most intense phase. She'll want to see her partner frequently and feels confident she's not being caught. I expect we'll have a clear answer by next Friday. At the very least, we'll identify any suspicious behavior that might require further investigation. I was impressed. He seemed skilled and had a solid grasp of human nature. I felt I'd chosen the right person for the job. Okay, I'm convinced. What will this cost me? He named a figure that made me flinch. It's a significant amount, he admitted, but consider the resources involved: staff, vehicles, and expensive equipment. More importantly, we'll give you clarity. How much is your peace of mind worth? He was right. I wrote the check. Over the next 2 weeks, I felt uneasy, second-guessing myself. Am I acting normal? Do I seem suspicious? Am I asking too much or too little? Anne's behavior made it clear it didn't matter. She treated me with the same coldness as always. When I asked about her work, she responded curtly, as if humoring me. It was obvious she thought I wouldn't understand her counsel responsibilities. I felt less like her husband and more like an annoyance. That weekend, I suggested we go out together. She brushed me off. I've got open houses all weekend, and you know how exhausting those are. It felt like we were roommates, not a married couple. Memories of our life together haunted me. The shared dreams, the long talks, the passion we once had. We couldn't walk past each other without ending up in each other's arms, overwhelmed by desire. What happened to that love and passion? The irony was cruel. The closer we got to achieving our dreams, the more distant we became. I realized how much my career drove me, not just for financial security, but because I found it intellectually fulfilling. And yet, I wondered, had I pushed Anne away? If I had, I felt she was equally to blame. Anne was a great realtor, but she always wanted more. Winning a council seat had been her dream, and now she was hinting at running for mayor. I couldn't understand why she was never satisfied with what she already had. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became that our careers had driven a wedge in our marriage. Yet, a nagging voice warned me there might be something deeper I was missing. Was I being paranoid? Or was there a real problem? Despite my discomfort, I decided hiring Masterson was the right move. Peace of mind was worth it. The 2 weeks felt like waiting for surgery, terrified of the outcome but desperate for answers. On the morning of my meeting, I stopped at Stranger Brew for coffee, my last meal. As I sat there, I scanned the room, half hoping to see Maria Elena, but relieved she wasn't there. When the time came, I walked to Masterson's office, feeling like a man heading to the gallows. As I checked in, Masterson appeared and motioned for me to follow. His subdued tone as he greeted me made my stomach churn. "Mr. Davis, come on in," he said. "Uh-oh. Not good." He sat behind his desk, resting his hands on a folder. The air was thick with tension. Unable to take it, I blurted out, "What did you find?" He slid the folder across the desk. "See for yourself," he said quietly. My heart raced as I opened the folder. The first photo showed Anne outside a house, holding the door for a young couple. A for sale sign was barely visible in the corner. Confused, I flipped to the next. A shot of her in a council meeting, then another of her talking to the mayor in City Hall. The following photos showed her entering her real estate office. I thumbed through them all. They were completely ordinary. Nothing suspicious. Looking up at Masterson, I saw his grim face transform into a broad grin. The investigator looked at me with a steady gaze. "Mr. Davis," he began, "your wife is not cheating. She hasn't done anything even remotely suspicious. She's exactly what she seems, a hard-working councilwoman and realtor." He leaned back in his chair, his expression confident. "Your wife is driven, successful, and dedicated, but not unfaithful." His tone softened as he added, "I know these past 2 weeks have been difficult for you, but now you can let go of your doubts and focus on enjoying your marriage." A warm smile spread across his face. "Most of the time, I'm delivering bad news to spouses. It's refreshing to be able to share something positive for once." Relief washed over me, but as I opened my mouth to thank him, he raised a hand to stop me. "You're a lucky man, Mr. Davis," he said firmly. "Your wife is everything she appears to be." Then, with a touch of humor, he handed me an envelope. "Here's the remainder of your bill. If you pay the receptionist on your way out, we won't need to mail it. I assume you wouldn't want that." He chuckled. Relieved, I nodded and left the office, lighter than I'd felt in months. I shook Masterson's hand, thanking him before leaving. I walked out feeling lighter than I had in ages. Relief quickly gave way to determination. I need to fix this. I need to show Anne how much I love her and stop taking her for granted. By the time I got home, I had a plan for the weekend, which fortunately was free of obligations for Anne. Friday night, flowers, takeout from her favorite Mediterranean spot, a bubble bath, and fresh sheets. Saturday, breakfast in bed, a spa day, more flowers, dinner at the nicest restaurant in town, and a night of rekindled romance. Anne got home around 7 o'clock, exhausted. She flopped onto the couch with a sigh. "I'm too tired to cook," she said, then perked up, sniffing the air. "What's that smell, and where did these flowers come from?" I knelt beside her, grinning. "The flowers are for my beautiful wife, and dinner's ready." She looked at me, surprised but pleased. "They're lovely. Let's put them on the table." I plated her meal, poured her favorite wine, and served it with exaggerated flair. "Your wine, my lady," I said. She smiled, tired but genuine. "I'll take it." As we ate, she paused and asked, "This is wonderful, but why now? Do you feel guilty about something?" I expected that. "Yes," I said honestly. "I've been so caught up in my work that I haven't appreciated how hard you're working. You do so much, and I've neglected you. I want to make it right." She studied me for a moment, then smiled warmly. "We've both been neglecting each other, haven't we?" After dinner, I drew her a bubble bath. "Relax as long as you want," I said, "and get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be even better." She laughed, a genuine, joyful sound I hadn't heard in a long time. Later, she noticed the new bedding. "Is this new?" "Only the finest for you," I replied. She smiled gratefully. "Thank you, Dave." The next morning, I woke early to prepare breakfast. Eggs Benedict, hash browns, fruit, and mimosas. I placed the tray on her nightstand. "Don't take too long," I teased. "Your spa appointment is at 10. Her eyes widened. "You're spoiling me." "Good," I said with a grin. "You deserve it." After Anne left for the spa, I tidied the house and booked a table at Il Fiorentino, her favorite upscale restaurant. When she returned in the afternoon, glowing and relaxed, I handed her a credit card. "Pick out something elegant for tonight," I said. "It's going to be magical." That evening, she descended the stairs in a stunning new dress, and I couldn't take my eyes off her. Over Prosecco at dinner, she smirked. "Are you sure you're not guilty of something, Dave? No mistress hiding somewhere?" I laughed, though her words stung given my recent paranoia. "Absolutely not. I take my vows seriously, and I could never find anyone more perfect than you." Her smile softened as she raised her glass. "I'd never do that to you either." We skipped dessert, eager to end the night on a high note, and returned home hand in hand. "What's next, dear husband?" she teased, her voice playful. That night we rekindled the passion we thought was gone, rediscovering the love that had brought us together. The next morning we slept in and went for a leisurely brunch, savoring every moment. The weekend felt like a revival of our old life, full of love and connection. By Monday morning, I was in great spirits. My effort to reconnect with Anne was working, and I felt closer to her than I had in months. Before leaving for work, I left a note on the bulletin board. "Cookies are sweet, cookies are fine, cookies I'm glad you're mine. Corny, but heartfelt." I couldn't wait for her to see it. Work flew by, and I made sure to leave early so I could greet her. As I heard the garage door, I waited eagerly in the kitchen, ready to welcome her. But when she entered, everything unraveled. Without warning, she slapped me hard across the face. Stunned, I staggered back. "What the hell was that?" I yelled, my face stinging. "You fool!" she screamed, her face twisted with rage. "You've been spying on me? You hired detectives to follow me? You don't trust me?" Her words struck harder than the slap. I tried to speak, but nothing came out. She stood, fists clenched, trembling with fury. "Do you have any idea how humiliating it is to know your own husband doesn't trust you? Well, say something," I stammered. "But I trust you, Cookie. I know you've been loyal." "Loyal? After you've had me followed for weeks?" Her voice cracked with anger. "And don't you ever call me Cookie again." I stared at the floor, unable to respond. My silence only fueled her anger. "So I was right this weekend. You were only nice because you felt guilty," she accused. "That's not true," I tried to explain, but she cut me off. "If you didn't feel guilty, you damn well should have." Tears streamed down her face. "I've never felt so betrayed, and by my own husband." She turned and stormed up the stairs. "I can't even look at you right now." Anne stomped upstairs, slamming the bedroom door. I sank onto the couch, head in my hands, overwhelmed. How do I fix this? Pacing the room, I thought, flowers and candy won't work, and if she finds out how much I paid Masterson, she'll lose it. Worse, what if she wanted a divorce? I couldn't blame her. Why had I let my paranoia ruin everything? After some time, I heard her come downstairs. She grabbed her purse, shot me a furious look, and hissed, "I can't stay in the same house with you," before storming out. I hurried after her. "Are you coming back?" "I haven't decided," she snapped, then drove off, tires screeching. Feeling helpless, I went upstairs to see what she'd been doing. The bedroom looked normal, but the guest room was a mess. My clothes piled on the bed and floor. She'd cleared my closet and dresser. At least she didn't kick me out of the house entirely, I thought as I moved my belongings into the guest room. Later, I forced myself to eat leftovers, waiting for her return. Hours passed, and I eventually gave up and went to bed. I woke briefly to her footsteps on the stairs and heard the bedroom door slam and lock behind her. The next morning, I used the guest bathroom to get ready for work. Before leaving, I wrote on the bulletin board, "I'm sorry, Anne. Can we talk?" It wasn't much, but it was a start. Work was a blur. I couldn't focus, consumed by thoughts of how to explain myself without making things worse. "I love you, but I suspected you were cheating," won't work. Or, "Now that I've checked you out, I trust you." Yeah, no. Finally, I decided on honesty. I was scared we were drifting apart and let paranoia take over. "I'm sorry." I left work early, ready to apologize, but my hopes crumbled when I saw the bulletin board. My note was erased, replaced with, "Go to hell." Not a good sign. Still, I made dinner, hoping we could talk. 2 hours later, I ate alone, put her plate in the fridge, and admitted defeat. When she finally came home, I couldn't help but say, "I was worried about you. I didn't know where you were." Her eyes were cold as steel. "Why didn't you ask your private investigator?" she shot back with biting sarcasm, then went upstairs, slamming the door. I groaned. We were in a cold war, with no truce in sight. Anne came and went as she pleased, ignoring me entirely. I was certain she would divorce me, but the papers never came. For now, we were just two strangers sharing a house. Over time, I noticed that while our relationship hadn't warmed, it had shifted. Her anger gradually gave way to indifference. She started speaking to me again, but only about practical matters. "Tomorrow is garbage day," or "Is there mail for me?" Still, she refused to discuss our issues, and the bedroom door remained shut. At night, as I lay in bed, my thoughts cycled endlessly like one of those irritating looping GIFs online. Resentment and defensiveness would kick in first. How long is she going to act like this? I haven't even done anything wrong. It's unfair for her to shut me out. Then guilt would take over. "This is your fault, David. Imagine how you'd feel if she did the same to you. How long would it take for you to forgive her?" Finally, I'd circle back to remorse. Above all, I felt deep pain. I missed my wife. I missed the emotional and physical connection we once had. My intention was to bring us closer, but all I'd done was push her away. I couldn't stop replaying the wonderful weekend we'd shared just before everything fell apart, mourning what I'd lost. Others began noticing my depression, but their questions and concern only made things worse. I couldn't bear the thought of explaining myself. I knew exactly how they'd react. They'd be horrified by what I'd done. Worse still, if word got out that I'd hired a detective to follow Anne, it could spark rumors and potentially damage her political career. If I destroyed her future, our relationship would be beyond saving. I felt trapped and miserable, with no one to confide in. Now I understood what purgatory felt like. One Sunday, I went for a walk in the woods, hoping the fresh air might clear my head. After an hour, I found a small clearing and sat on a log to rest. The tranquility of the setting sharply contrasted with the storm inside me. I can't keep living like this. I love Anne, but this isn't a marriage anymore. It's not fair to either of us. We're both at fault, but most of the blame is mine. In that quiet clearing, I reached a painful realization. Our marriage is dead, and I'm the one who eliminated it. Strangely, admitting this brought a small sense of relief. I took a deep breath and looked at the beautiful sky and trees around me. This place is so peaceful. I wish Anne could see it with me. But that thought brought a bitter taste of defeat. The next day, I threw myself into work, trying to keep my mind occupied. When that wasn't enough, I began researching family law firms that specialized in amicable divorces. If our marriage truly was beyond saving, I wanted the split to be as respectful as possible. After some searching, I found a firm that seemed to align with my goals and scheduled a consultation. I had just hung up from setting the appointment when my phone rang again. "Is this David Davis?" asked a hesitant voice, one I vaguely recognized. "Yes," I replied. "Who's calling?" "This is Maria Elena Alvarez. I'm not sure if you remember me, but we met at Stranger Brew." The name and the encounter came back to me immediately. "Yes, of course, Maria Elena. What can I do for you?" Her tone grew serious. "I need to talk to you about something important." "Okay," I responded cautiously. "What's this about?" "Not over the phone, she insisted, her voice laced with urgency. "This needs to be discussed in person." Her insistence made me wary. "Can you at least give me an idea of what this is about?" I pressed. "Please, David," she said, almost pleading now. "I need to see you right away. I can come to your office if that works for you." Her tone intrigued me, though I was still wary. I decided a public place would be safer. "No, my office isn't a good idea. How about this? I'll meet you at Stranger Brew in 15 minutes. Does that work?" "Yes," she agreed quickly. "Thank you." What am I walking into? I wondered as I grabbed my coat and left for the cafe. Despite my unease, curiosity flickered in the back of my mind. When I arrived, Maria Elena was already seated at a table near the back. She stood up, smiling nervously as I approached. She handed me a cup of my usual coffee, clearly remembering my order. I accepted it and sat across from her. "Thanks for meeting me," she said, her tone serious. I nodded, taking a sip. "So, what's this about?" She leaned forward, her face earnest. "First, let me ask, how are things with your wife?" The question threw me off. I hesitated. "Why do you want to know?" "I know about the investigation," she said quietly, almost in a whisper. I froze, stunned. "How do you know?" She winced. "I worked for Masterson," she admitted. "I was part of the team that followed your wife." A wave of emotions, embarrassment, anger, confusion, washed over me. "Okay," I said slowly, trying to process her words. "Why are you telling me this now?" She bit her lip, hesitating before continuing. "Because there's something you don't know, something Masterson didn't tell you." My stomach sank. "What are you talking about?" Maria Elena leaned in closer, lowering her voice even more. "Yesterday morning I was making copies at the office. Your file was left on the copier. I know I shouldn't have touched it, but I remembered how kind you were to me, and curiosity got the better of me. So I looked inside." "What did you see?" I asked, my voice tight with apprehension. She took a deep breath. "I saw the photos Masterson gave you, the ones of your wife doing her usual activities, showing houses, attending council meetings, that sort of thing." I nodded impatiently. "Yes, and?" "And there were other photos," she said, locking eyes with me. "Photos that Masterson didn't give you." A chill ran down my spine. "What kind of photos?" "Photos of your wife with another man," she said cautiously. "And they weren't just standing together. They were intimate." My stomach dropped, and I felt my breath catch. "That's impossible," I whispered. "Masterson told me she wasn't cheating. He said—" "He lied," Maria Elena interrupted. "I don't know why, but he lied to you. There's no mistaking what's in those pictures." My head swirled with disbelief. "Do you have copies of the pictures?" She shook her head. "No, I didn't get a chance. Masterson caught me before I could make copies. He flew into a rage and fired me on the spot. But I swear to you, David, I'm telling the truth." I studied her expression for any hint of dishonesty, but all I saw was earnestness. Still, I couldn't make sense of it. Why would Masterson lie to me? What was in it for him? Maria Elena seemed to read my thoughts. "I don't know why he lied, but I think I know what's going on. Your wife is a public figure. If those pictures got out, they'd destroy her career. I think Masterson is blackmailing her." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Blackmail? Was Anne keeping secrets to protect herself? "There's more," Maria Elena said urgently. "Before I left, I saw Masterson's calendar. He has a meeting with your wife today, in less than 30 minutes. That stopped me in my tracks. There were plenty of people who would exploit a scandal to unseat Anne in the next election. As ambitious as she was, Anne would do almost anything to avoid that kind of humiliation. Without thinking, I rubbed the spot on my jaw where she had slapped me. Was she lying to me all along? Was she treating me like dirt and laughing about it with her lover? The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. I stood abruptly and walked toward the sidewalk. Maria Elena hurried after me, grabbing my arm. "David, where are you going?" she asked urgently. "I'm heading to Masterson's office," I replied. "I need to get to the bottom of this." "Wait," she said, pulling me back. "Think for a second. If I'm right, Masterson will only lie to protect his leverage over your wife. He's probably already hidden those photos. You won't get anything from him." I paused, uncertain, and she seized the moment to continue. "And what if you confront Anne? Do you really think she'll admit to anything? If you tell them what I've told you, they'll just dismiss me as a disgruntled former employee. It'll be my word against theirs." She tugged me toward a nearby bench and looked at me intently. David, I swear I'm telling the truth. Please believe me. I studied her face for a long moment, trusting my instincts. She wasn't lying. She was trying to do the right thing. I believe you, Maria Elena, I said firmly. Relief flickered across her face, but her expression quickly grew serious again. There's another reason I needed to meet you now, she said. I found out where they're meeting. It's a suburban address. If you're willing to watch for a while, we might figure out what's really going on. Do you have the address? I asked. She handed me a slip of paper. 2232 Magnolia Lane. Why there? I muttered to myself. It's a residential area. Shaking my head, I said, we'll figure it out when we get there. Let's go. My car is nearby. We drove in silence, but my mind was racing. I'd spent so much time feeling guilty for not trusting Anne, only to find I might have been right all along. My anger boiled beneath the surface. Who was this other man? How long had the affair been going on? And how was Masterson involved? I forced myself to stay calm. Don't jump to conclusions, David. Wait until you have proof. But that was easier said than done. There it is, Maria Elena said, snapping me out of my thoughts as I nearly drove past the address. I turned around and parked 2 houses down. This is a nice neighborhood, I said, more to myself than to her. Whose house is this? As we got out of the car, I noticed something I hadn't seen before, a for sale sign from Anne's real estate agency. It all clicked. That's why they're meeting here, I said quietly but firmly. The house is vacant. The owners moved out months ago, and she's been trying to sell it. We crouched behind the tall hedge encircling the property and headed toward the driveway. 2 cars were parked there, neither of which I recognized. Stay here. I'll scout around and see if I can spot them, I whispered. I'm coming too, Maria Elena said firmly, and I shrugged. Together, we cautiously moved toward the house, sticking to the shade of the hedge. From the back of the house, we heard faint noises. As we crept closer, we noticed French doors leading into what appeared to be a den. Peering inside, my adrenaline surged. Anne, wearing lingerie I'd never seen before, was lounging on the couch, speaking to someone out of view around the corner. I clenched my teeth. She seemed completely at ease. Suddenly, a figure stepped into view, Bradley Masterson, grinning smugly. As they laughed together, I grabbed Maria Elena's arm and motioned for her to follow me back outside. Rage boiled in my chest. That witch, I hissed once we were safely out of earshot. If this is blackmail, she sure doesn't look like she minds. Should we take pictures? Maria Elena asked. I considered for a moment before smirking. Oh, we'll take plenty of pictures and maybe involve a few others. I hurried over to Anne's for sale sign, yanked it from the ground, and tossed it behind a hedge where it wouldn't be easily spotted. Then I pulled out my phone and dialed emergency. I'd like to report a break-in, I said, keeping my voice calm. I saw 2 people force their way into 2232 Magnolia Lane. They're likely still inside. Please send someone quickly. I hung up without giving my name. Maria Elena looked at me in confusion, but I ignored her and made another call. Hey, Amy, it's David. Are you still covering the local burglary series? I've got a hot lead for you. 2232 Magnolia Lane. Police are already on their way. If you act fast, you'll beat the competition and get some great footage. After thanking her, I ended the call. What did you just do? Maria Elena asked, her voice uneasy. I waved her question aside. Come on, let's get those pictures. We crept back to the French doors. Inside, another man had joined them. Maria Elena gripped my arm. That's the man from the photos, she whispered. Do you know who he is? Oh, I know him, I said bitterly. Anne introduced me to him at one of her events. That's Harold Hartfield, head of the zoning commission. Before I could say more, Maria Elena tugged me away. A patrol car had just pulled up at the end of the driveway. We hurried toward the officers. We just saw them, I said, trying to sound breathless. They're still inside. If you move quickly, you can catch them. The senior officer glanced at his partner. There are cars in the driveway and no sign of forced entry, he said, his tone skeptical. Are you sure a crime is happening? Just then, a Channel 9 news van screeched to a stop nearby. A reporter and cameraman jumped out. What's going on? Are we getting any action today? The reporter asked eagerly. Before the officers could respond, a piercing scream tore through the air, freezing everyone in place. Oh my God! I shouted. He's eliminating her! The officers exchanged panicked glances as another scream rang out louder than the first. Let's move! The senior officer barked, drawing his weapon. The 2 officers rushed to the front door and disappeared inside. Start filming, the reporter commanded the cameraman, who immediately trained his lens on the house. The reporter turned to the camera, speaking rapidly. Behind me, is a home at 2232 Magnolia Lane, where police are responding to a suspected burglary. Moments ago, we heard what sounded like a violent struggle. He stopped mid-sentence as chaos erupted inside. There was the sound of crashing furniture, breaking glass, and panicked shouting. The cameraman refocused just in time to capture Harold Hartfield stumbling out the front door, completely unclothed. A second later, Anne followed, equally unclothed. "Wait for me!" she yelled, as Hartfield threw open the door of one of the cars and jumped in. She climbed in after him, and he reversed sharply, nearly hitting the patrol car at the driveway's edge. Desperately, Hartfield shifted into drive and sped across the lawn. The car tore up the yard before crashing into the thick hedge, where the rear axle became stuck, leaving the tires spinning uselessly in midair. Recognizing the two public figures, the reporter signaled the cameraman and rushed toward the stranded car. "Commissioner Hartfield, Councilwoman Davis, can you explain to our viewers what you were doing here together? And where are your clothes?" The commissioner refused to respond to the reporter's questions, but when pressed, he reluctantly rolled down the car window. The camera continued filming as he and Harold argued furiously, both attempting to shield their unclothedness with their hands and arms. The cameraman then turned his focus back to the house, capturing Bradley Masterson being escorted out, hunched and unclothed, his hands cuffed and blood dripping from several cuts. The two officers leading him didn't look much better, their uniforms torn and faces weary. "Who's that?" the reporter asked, perplexed. "That's Bradley Masterson," Maria Elena explained. "He's the president of Masterson Investigations, a private investigator." The reporter jotted down the name but looked puzzled. "And who are you?" he asked. "Maria Elena," she replied. "I decided it was time to leave." "Let's go home," I said firmly, taking her hand and steering her to my car. As we drove away, we passed police officers attempting to disperse a growing crowd of curious neighbors. In the days that followed, the story became a citywide sensation. Channel 9 used the footage in their evening news promo, repeatedly showing the commissioner, councilwoman, and detective attempting to cover themselves. The clip was so scandalous that the station's national affiliate picked it up, airing it on national news. Soon, nearly everyone in the country had seen the unforgettable footage of my wife sprinting across the lawn in her birthday suit. Masterson was quickly jailed for aggravated attack on a police officer. His behavior during the arrest didn't help. He hurled crude insults and threats at the officers escorting him to his cell. The judge, unimpressed, denied him bail. His arrogance ensured he would remain behind bars until his trial. The cases against Anne and Harold were more complicated. It was quickly determined that no breaking and entering had occurred. Anne was the listing agent for the property and had legitimate access. Even trespassing charges were dismissed. Still, the scandal forced both of them into hiding, as public outrage was relentless. Local media wasted no time digging deeper. Headlines were merciless, with one particularly scathing piece titled, "Commissioner and Councilwoman, Politics Make Strange Acquaintances." At first, I thought the frenzy was purely due to their affair, but it turned out to be much more. A determined journalist uncovered evidence of bribery linked to several city real estate projects. Anne had been soliciting bribes from developers while Harold used his position to manipulate zoning permits, exchanging favors for Zex. The revelations unraveled their schemes, and law enforcement moved swiftly. Both Anne and Harold were arrested and charged with official misconduct. Their downfall became a spectacle, every detail gleefully documented by the media. Their once respected names became synonymous with corruption and disgrace. The day after the scandal broke, I returned to my office and called the divorce attorney I had initially contacted. "Oh," the receptionist said cheerfully. "Does this mean you and your wife are reconciling?" "No," I said coldly. "It means I don't want an amicable split anymore. I'll be hiring a shark to ensure she's left with nothing." The police questioned me several times during their investigation, probing whether I had been involved in or benefited from Anne's schemes. Thankfully, I had nothing to hide. Anne had kept her illicit earnings in an account solely under her name. When I explained how I had hired Masterson to investigate her, the officer interviewing me simply shook his head in disbelief. My friends and colleagues were sympathetic, but unsure of what to say. No one could openly express, "Sorry your wife turned out to be a corrupt cheater," or "Sorry you were played for a fool." Most chose to avoid me altogether. I didn't blame them. I wanted to avoid myself too. The divorce moved quickly, thanks to my ruthless attorney. Anne's public disgrace and pending charges left her with little leverage, and the settlement was heavily skewed in my favor. By the end, Anne was left with almost nothing, except for what little remained of her tarnished reputation. I thought I was finally done with that chapter of my life. Then, unexpectedly, Anne's lawyer contacted me. They wanted me to testify in her defense. The idea was so absurd that I laughed when I first heard it. My amusement faded when the lawyer explained that if I refused, I would be subpoenaed. I hated the thought of being dragged back into Anne's mess, but curiosity won out. The lawyer mentioned that Anne would be present during the pretrial meeting, and I couldn't resist the chance to confront her. When I arrived at the lawyer's office, Anne was already seated at the conference table, wearing one of her signature power suits. She looked composed, but the stress was visible in her eyes. She offered me a tight smile, her gaze steely and cold. "Mr. Davis," the lawyer began in a neutral tone, "I understand your marriage is ending, but we're not here to discuss that. We are seeking to establish that Mrs. Davis, prior to these events, was a loving wife and a person of good character. We would like you to testify to that effect." I turned my gaze calmly from the lawyer to Anne. "When I married my wife," I began, "she seemed like the most captivating, intelligent, and dynamic woman I had ever met. She was smart, funny, and charismatic. People were naturally drawn to her." The lawyer nodded, encouraging me to go on. "For the first 6 years of our marriage, Anne and I shared the same dreams and goals. I believed we were building a life together." I paused, fixing my eyes on Anne. "But then, she changed." The lawyer tensed. "Changed, Mr. Davis." "Yes," I said. "After she was elected to the city council, she became more ambitious, self-centered even. She neglected our marriage entirely to focus on her career. The contempt she showed me eventually drove me to hire a private investigator." "That's enough, Mr. Davis," the lawyer interjected, her alarm apparent. Anne waved her off dismissively. "It's fine. He was never going to help me, Virginia." She turned to me with a cold, calculating look. "So why are you here, Dave? What do you want?" I leaned forward. "I want 30 minutes alone with you. Just enough time to ask some questions." Anne raised an eyebrow, glancing at her lawyer, who looked visibly uneasy. "You don't have to agree to this," the lawyer said quickly, but Anne raised her hand to silence her. "Fine," she said coolly. "You've got 30 minutes." The lawyer hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Are you sure?" she asked Anne. Anne gave a sharp nod. "It's okay. He won't hurt me." Her voice was calm, almost dismissive, but I could see the cracks beneath her composed facade. Reluctantly, the lawyer gathered her things, shot me one last warning look, and left, closing the door behind her. Anne leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "Well, Dave, the floor is yours. What do you want to ask?" I stared at her, the weight of everything she had done pressing down on me. "Why, Anne, why did you do it?" My voice was even, but anger simmered underneath. She leaned forward suddenly, her eyes blazing with fury. "Why? This is all your fault, you know. I wouldn't be in this mess if you hadn't hired that detective to spy on me." I blinked, taken aback by her audacity. "My fault? You're the one who—" "Yes, your fault!" she snapped, cutting me off. "Everything was fine until that fool showed up at my office with those pictures of Harold and me. You sent him after me." I clenched my fists, but kept my tone steady. "And you wouldn't have had anything to worry about if you hadn't been sleeping with Hartfield." Her expression shifted into a mocking smirk, as though I was missing the point entirely. "It wasn't an affair, Dave. It was politics." "Politics?" I repeated, incredulous. "You slept with him for politics?" Anne shrugged nonchalantly. "Harold was a terrible lover, smaller than you if you must know. But he had something I needed, influence over zoning permits." I frowned. "And why did you need zoning permits? You're not a real estate developer." She rolled her eyes, clearly exasperated. "I didn't need them, Dave. The developers did. And I needed their support for my mayoral campaign. That's how politics works." "So, it was just about endorsements?" I asked sharply. "Not the money?" Her cheeks flushed slightly, but she maintained her composure. "Okay, maybe it was about the money too," she admitted with a sly smile. "But none of this would have been an issue if you hadn't been so damn nosy." Disbelief washed over me as I shook my head. "Anne, what about Masterson? What did he want?" "Half," she said flatly. "Half of what?" I pressed. "Half of what I was getting," she replied coolly. "And half of what Harold was getting." I stared at her, trying to piece it all together. "Wait, you said Harold was only involved because you seduced him, so why would Masterson demand anything from him?" Her expression faltered briefly, a flicker of something resembling shame. or maybe just irritation. Because Harold wasn't as innocent as he pretended, she admitted. He wasn't just helping me with zoning permits. He was skimming money from the developers, too. And you went along with it? Of course, she said matter-of-factly. But I didn't realize how much leverage Masterson would have over me. You mean he blackmailed you? I asked, though I already knew the answer. She smiled, cold and unrepentant. Only the first time. After that, I realized he was vastly superior to Harold in certain ways. Vastly superior? I repeated, a knot of disgust forming in my stomach. She leaned back, her smirk widening. Let's just say everyone has their preferences, and I'd discovered mine. I stared at her, struggling to grasp how far she had fallen. So you're saying you didn't even mind that I hired Masterson? I asked, my tone laced with sarcasm. She chuckled, a low, humorless sound. No, actually, I think I owe you for that one. Her amusement faded, replaced by a sharp bitterness. Everything would have been fine if it hadn't been for those nosy neighbors on Magnolia Lane. If they hadn't called the police, none of this would have blown up. I smiled then, a slow, deliberate smile. For the first time in the entire conversation, I felt a sliver of satisfaction. Actually, Anne, it wasn't the neighbors, it was me. I'm the one who called the police, and I'm the one who tipped off Channel 9. Her face twisted with rage. You son of a witch! She screamed, springing to her feet so quickly that her chair crashed to the floor. She grabbed a heavy law book from a shelf behind her and flung it across the table. I ducked just in time, and the book slammed into the wall with a loud thud. Before she could escalate further, the door flew open, and her lawyer rushed in, grabbing her arm. Anne, stop it! Calm down! You can't do this! I straightened my posture and brushed imaginary dust off my sleeve. I'm sorry I can't be a character witness for your client, I said to the lawyer with mock politeness. Then, turning to Anne one last time, I added, Enjoy your time in jail, Cookie. With that, I walked out, leaving her yelling angrily behind me. Masterson eventually took a plea deal, admitting guilt to a reduced charge of attacking a police officer in exchange for testifying against Anne and Harold. His cooperation earned him a lighter sentence, but he permanently lost his private investigator's license. Harold, on the other hand, received a less severe punishment than Anne since he hadn't directly accepted bribes. However, his reputation was destroyed. He lost his job, his wife, and whatever dignity he had left. He quietly left town soon after. In my opinion, he got exactly what he deserved. I stayed away from Anne's trial. I no longer cared about her fate and didn't want any reminders of the chaos she had caused in my life. One day, though, as I sat in a cafe, a headline caught my eye in a nearby newspaper. It announced Anne's sentencing, and curiosity got the better of me. I picked it up. Anne had been sentenced to 3 to 5 years in state prison and fined $25,000 for soliciting an illegal gratuity. But that wasn't the end of her troubles. The article revealed she was also facing federal charges for tax evasion tied to her secret cash fund. Apparently, the state seizing her illicit assets wasn't enough to satisfy the IRS. I set the paper down and leaned back in my chair, a strange sense of closure washing over me. Exactly what she deserves, I muttered under my breath. Maybe now I could finally move forward. As I savored that thought, a familiar voice broke through my reverie. Hey, stranger, can you buy a girl a cup of coffee? I looked up and smiled. I'd be delighted, Maria Elena.